What I like about wholehearted facilitation is our work can be done one-on-one, facilitating a conversation and a learning experience with an individual person, as well as working with small groups. I usually say small groups are up to 8 to 10 people. That's usually manageable enough by one person. But I've been asked many times, but what happens when you have groups that are much bigger than that? Sometimes I have groups of 20, 30 people, and I've even facilitated for groups that include thousands of people. What do you do in those situations? Well, what I say to you is you can make that conversation just as intimate, powerful, and unique to the individual participants as you do when there are 1 or 6. The way that you would do that is if you have an extremely large group, what I would encourage you to do is have that person, have that voice who opens up the conversation by introducing, this is the overview of what we're going to do today. This is the theme for the day and what we're trying to accomplish. And then actually has everybody bring out their materials and walks them through the process of completing the steps for the exercise. This completing the steps for most of our exercises is an individual process where people are thinking about their own responses, what they've been through, and how they want to articulate their experiences. And so once they have a chance to process that, then you get an opportunity to break into smaller groups. There are 2 ways to break into smaller groups. Sometimes I have people break into smaller groups where I have a trained facilitator in that group. In those situations, it's usually a topic that is really sensitive and one that you may need someone with the level of expertise to be in the conversation. So you can speak to the whole group, give them the exercise and the activity along with the details, and then break into smaller groups of 8 to 10 people with a trained facilitator. In that situation, that trained facilitator would do the exact same thing that you would do with a group of 8 to 10. They lead the conversation, they participate in the conversation, and they make sure that every person has an opportunity to speak and be heard and process what they hear themselves saying so that they can make change when they leave the session. When we break into those small groups, we then get back together, and oftentimes the trained facilitator will be the person who will report back to the big group what the themes were of the conversations, what the learning points were, or maybe what the ahas were. We come back together so that every one of those small groups oftentimes will get a chance to report out, depending on the number of small groups that we have, or if not, if we have too many groups, just letting a few of them report out so that we can see that work has been done in that session. Now, when I have a room of hundreds or maybe thousands and I don't have enough facilitators, and it's not such a touchy topic that you need someone who's trained, what I make sure is that in every group you have the call to action. So that call to action is really what specifically should you be doing when you get in your small group. Oftentimes, there we want to make sure that each group has something in writing that says, first you will do this, second you will do this, third you will do this, and fourth you will do that. The more you have things in writing, the less you have to rely on people hearing things in different ways and interpreting them in different ways. A note on interpretation. Even if you have it in writing, people are still going to interpret things in different ways. And what I generally tell people is that as long as you learn something and get something out of it, if you do it differently than another group, it does not matter. What matters most is that you process, you learn, you grow, and you find some action steps to move beyond this experience. So you want to list out the specific steps that each group would follow, and oftentimes those specific steps include making sure that everybody in the group has a chance to speak and be heard without being interrupted. So it may be, depending on the time, if they have 20 minutes and it's only 5 people, you may say each person gets 2 to 3 minutes to speak, that we're going to have to watch the time so that everybody gets a chance to speak, and then we'll have general conversation afterwards, figuring out if there are any themes that emerge. So you want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak, to tell what's on their heart. And then if you have time, it's really important once they hear everyone else for each person to say, this is the action. This is the step that I will take as a result of considering what I wrote and hearing from everyone else. In those groups, it is really important to reiterate the importance of when someone is sharing, the other participants are really bearing witness and not waiting to give that person advice. Because oftentimes we want to tell people what they should do, but again, we only have a glimpse of what they've gone through. We don't have the whole picture. Now, we may want to ask them questions if we have time, open-ended questions that allow them to continue to process. But again, giving specific advice is not something that I recommend. So in the smaller groups, we make sure that everyone is heard. We make sure that everyone has an action statement that they can come back with. And then when we get back in the big groups, we would ask that somebody from each of the smaller groups or a few people from the smaller groups can report out to the big group. This gives momentum to the conversation. It allows people to see that everyone had a chance to really process. After we have the report outs, then I try to make sure as the key facilitator that I have a couple points that to end with. Maybe these are points that we want to make about what you can do with the information that you learned. We also want to tell people, be sure, don't just leave it at knowledge. Yes, you've gotten some knowledge today. Maybe you've felt a couple things, but if you don't then act on it, we leave the power of the activity right where it is, and we want to move beyond it. What we also want to tell people is, yes, you've learned and processed some things today, but there's greater power in continuing to process. Find a partner, maybe someone in your small group, maybe someone else who's been in this experience and was in another group, but find a partner to continue to process, to hold you accountable, and to report your successes to. So you can see how you can take a really large group, complete an activity, and it can go far beyond just a few people and one facilitator. Most of all, I want to always encourage people that when you leave people at the end of a session, if you can give them additional resources, things that will broaden their perspective, activities they can complete so they can gain additional knowledge, or anything that will help them to hold themselves and others accountable, give them those nuggets at the end. Oftentimes I will say, here's a free video that you can watch, or a book that you can buy, or something that makes the experience even deeper. What I want to emphasize as we end this video is to tell you this, that when you have an opportunity to facilitate with someone, that learning that happens is only a small part of it. Real learning happens over time as they process it that night, the next day, as they talk to other people about the experience, and as they continue to have things happen to them, that they go back and look at what they learned in your session. So encourage people to be lifetime learners, very curious about every experience, and willing to go deeper and deeper with whatever you've given them. I hope that this information helps you as you facilitate for any size group or any individual. And if you have questions, don't forget that you can send us a note and ask us to help you in any way that we can. Thanks for listening.